Since 1948, genocide has had one legal definition, written into Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. Acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. In the spring of 1994, Rwanda met that definition in real time. By UN estimates, some 800,000 people murdered in roughly 100 days. The governments watching chose their words carefully. Acts of genocide, never the crime itself. So, is Rwanda recognized as genocide? Yes, without qualification. On September 2nd, 1998, an international tribunal created by the Security Council convicted Jean-Paul Akayesu of genocide.
Accusé Akayesu, vous êtes déclaré coupable de génocide.
The first person ever convicted of the crime by an international court, 4 years after it would have mattered.
Participated and committed acts of genocide.
Rwanda is the case where recognition was total, unanimous, and entirely posthumous. This is the anatomy of 100 days of silence. Genocide doesn't suddenly happen. The conditions for it build up over time. The machinery has to exist. In this series, we examine 4 instances of mass killings which satisfy most, if not all, the criteria to be classified as genocide.
I was 9 years old when the genocide started in Rwanda.
Rwanda appartient à ceux qui le défendent vraiment. Et vous, les IND, vous n'êtes pas des Rwandais.
This is RTLM, a highly influential Rwandan broadcaster whose hate propaganda helped incite violence.
One of the striking things about the Rwandan genocide is how quickly it happened and how many people who had no prior history of violence ultimately came to participate in the genocide and participate in different ways.
On the 7th of April, 1994, RTLM called on the Hutu to avenge the death of the Rwandan president.
When the genocide against the Tutsi happened in 1994 in Rwanda, the initial press reports talked about it being an explosion of ancient tribal hatreds, the centuries-old conflict between the Hutu and Tutsi.
The world has spent 30 years asking how ordinary Rwandans became killers so quickly. So how do you turn the radio, the one thing everyone in a country trusts, into the instrument of its own undoing? Rwanda is a small country, 26,000 square kilometers, about the size of Belgium. By 1994, more than 6 million people lived inside it, one of the most densely populated countries on the African continent. Many communities were rural and tightly interconnected, where neighbors often knew one another personally.
In Rwanda, there were Hutu and Tutsi and Twa, the 3 ethnic groups, before colonialism. But the meaning of the terms was very different than what we think of it as today.
There were fluid social classifications tied largely to status, occupation, and cattle ownership, and movement between Hutu and Tutsi identities was possible.
Rwanda is an incredibly integrated place. These are intimate relations between Hutu and Tutsi, same family, same communities, same workplaces, same schools, same language, same religion, same customs.
A Hutu who acquired cattle could become Tutsi. A Tutsi who lost them could become Hutu. In the 1930s, Rwanda was still under Belgian colonial rule, and the authorities conducted a census and registration process.
The colonialists who came in were steeped in the ideas of social Darwinism, the idea of racial hierarchies in the world, and the idea that all of the world could be divided into different racial groups.
But Belgium was not the first European country to govern Rwanda. That was Germany. But the Belgian colonial authorities did turn the more fluid racial categories into fixed administrative identities. They used physical appearance and racial theories to classify Rwandans.
That is, they said the Tutsi are a superior race of people. They are white-like, lighter-skinned, and are actually so-called Hamites who came from the north, maybe the Middle East, and they came and conquered this more lowly Bantu Hutu population.
Because the colonial administration controlled the state, it translated those ideas into policy.
There were taxes that the Hutu had to pay that Tutsi did not. There were opportunities for education and jobs that the Tutsi got to experience.
And that racial interpretation then got encoded in identity cards eventually.
Identity became fixed. People could not move between categories. They could not contest their category.
And that happened at exactly the time when the division between Tutsi and Hutu mattered so much.
As Rwanda moved towards independence, the colonial authorities, and the Catholic Church alongside them, shifted their support toward Hutu political participation. Some moderate political forces pushed for reform in cross-ethnic politics, while conservative Tutsi elites resisted Belgian-backed majority rule reforms. The long-excluded Hutu were the new allies.
When independence came, the Hutu, who were the majority, said, freedom is not just the end of European rule. Freedom and democracy are the end of Tutsi domination as well. That was the argument they made.
In 1959, the Hutu-led uprising, backed and later protected by Belgian colonial authorities, burned thousands of Tutsi homes.
So the European intervention indirectly contributed to identity formation that ultimately became the foundation of the nationalism that animated the genocide in 1994.
There was hatred that was ingrained in people for a long time. That's something that people were always being reminded that, you know, there are Hutus, there are Tutsis, but Tutsi, they are different. You know, they are the enemies, they are subclass citizens.
The killing didn't begin in 1994, but in November 1959. By the mid-1960s, more than 300,000 Tutsi fled into exile. When Rwanda became independent in 1962, Belgian colonial rule ended, but the ethnic classification system it had institutionalized remained.
We were always, every now and then, being asked to line up in different categories: Tutsis, Hutus, and Twa, the minority group in Rwanda. And I remember at the very first time when I was probably 7 or 8, when we had to line up, I went home because I did not know what was my ethnic group. I went home and asked my mom, and she said I should line up with the majority. As adults, they did not want children to feel that we are a group that is destined to be killed or to something bad.
The Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF, was founded in 1987 by Rwandan refugees, most of whom were Tutsi. In 1990, its armed wing crossed from Uganda into Rwanda and started the civil war. The RPF translates as the FPR in French. For President Juvenal Habyarimana's government, the RPF was a military problem.
Essentially, you had a government that decided to fight a civil war by trying to destroy the minority Tutsi population.
They were called Hutu Power. They were a faction within Habyarimana's government: military officers, propagandists, politicians, journalists, who believed that any concession to the RPF was a death sentence for Hutu rule. When the RPF invaded in 1990, a pro-Hutu Power newspaper called Kangura had published what it called the Hutu 10 Commandments. It declared that any Hutu who did business with, or married, or employed a Tutsi was a traitor. It also declared that all strategic political, military, economic, and security positions should be reserved for Hutu and referred to the Tutsi as the, quote, common enemy of the Hutu. By 1993, after 3 years of civil war, international pressure forced Habyarimana to the table, and the Arusha Accords were signed in August 1993. They required power sharing and the integration of RPF and government forces into a new national army. For Hutu power, this was unacceptable, so they began planning to destroy it. A group called the Interahamwe, which began as the youth wing of the ruling MRND party, was now transformed into a paramilitary organization.
This was done supposedly in the name of self-defense, but we also see it as a way to help sort of lay the groundwork and prepare for the violence that followed.
The Rwandan government imported machetes by the hundreds of thousands, and a new radio station was launched called RTLM.
I think RTLM was so instrumental, both in the lead up to the genocide and then after April 6th, when the events began to unfold.
RTLM was financed by hardliners and people close to the president, Agathe Habyarimana's inner circle and network. But RTLM did not sound like the state. It played the music people loved. Its hosts used street language, joked, gossiped, and called listeners by name.
RTLM was one that said things that you couldn't say on the official radio station, and they really did have personalities that helped to promote the ideology of violence.
It sounded like a friend, one that would call a Tutsi an Nyenzi, a cockroach.
Avis à tous les Indiens qui nous écoutent, oui, à tous les Indiens qui nous écoutent, le Rwanda appartient à ceux qui le défendent vraiment. Et vous, les Indiens, vous n'êtes pas des Rwandais.
RTLM used the term Inkotanyi, RPF fighter, with Tutsi civilian, turning a military term into a broader ethnic slur. The hosts used Inkotanyi, meaning an RPF fighter, to refer to all Tutsis, from soldiers to children. They used the term gukora, meaning to work.
They're playing on this existing cultural notion of doing your duty, doing public duty. And so the messaging about going out to do your work is very clear.
But hate speech alone doesn't move people from their homes to roadblocks on the streets. RTLM did something more sinister. It named names, addresses, license plates, hiding spots, turning a radio into a manhunt. The media case judgment in the UN Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda documented broadcasts of this kind.
There were already lists of people to kill in some communities, particularly in the capital.
On the 6th of April 1994, a plane carrying the presidents of Rwanda and Burundi was shot down as it approached Kigali Airport. Everyone on board was killed. The attackers have never been clearly identified.
What happened is, after he was killed, you saw these hardliners who were part of his ruling coalition essentially take control of the state and then take this extreme position that in order to win the civil war, that they were going to eliminate the Tutsi population.
Within an hour, roadblocks were set up across the capital. By late that evening, Kigali was full of checkpoints. Then, RTLM came on the air. It claimed that the RPF had assassinated the president and that Belgian UN peacekeepers helped carry out the attack.
So I was in the room sleeping with my cousin who was 4 years old, and we heard gunshots, and my mom came to our room to check on us, and she didn't say anything, but we could see that she was scared. She had fear in her eyes because she didn't know what was going on.
Agathe Uwilingiyimana was the prime minister of Rwanda, a moderate Hutu who argued for power sharing. In the event of the president's death, under the Constitution, she was one of the key figures who could have led a lawful transition. On the morning of the 7th of April, the President Guards surrounded her residence. The 10 UN peacekeepers assigned to protect her were captured and killed. Uwilingi Yimana and her husband were killed in a UN compound. A UN peacekeeper named Mbaye Donya managed to smuggle their children out. After the murder of its peacekeepers, the Belgian troops withdrew. 2 weeks later, on the 21st of April, the United Nations reduced UNAMIR's force from around 2,100 personnel to 270.
Immediately after the president's death, the Presidential Guard and some other elite groups went into the city with lists of journalists and moderate priests and pastors and human rights activists and moderate Hutu politicians and also Tutsi leaders to target. And they systematically started killing off those people.
By the end of April 7th, much of Rwanda's moderate political leadership had been decapitated.
And in the morning of April 8th, we heard people in our home. They came to search our home to see if we were there so they could kill us.
RTLM radio was still on. Across Rwanda, the killing took place at roadblocks.
So there were roadblocks that were set up on all of the major paths and roads in the country. And there were neighborhood watch groups.
At every roadblock, the instruction was the same: show your card. Anyone carrying a Tutsi identity card was killed on the spot. If a card was missing, destroyed, swapped, or claimed lost, the killers used a different method. They looked at people's bodies. Survivors described killers assessing what they called Tutsiness: height, nose width, the set of the eyes. It was the colonial classification system the Belgians had built in the 1930s, applied 61 years later by farmers at a checkpoint with a machete in their hand.
By that point, it's everywhere and happening at a level of school teachers killing students, neighbors killing neighbors, just horrific savagery.
Local officials, clergy, soldiers, and community leaders encouraged Tutsis to gather at churches, schools, and public buildings.
It was hard to find a place to hide in Rwanda.
They said the buildings would be safe, that the killings were targeted elsewhere. Soldiers and Interahamwe paramilitaries arrived hours or days later. They surrounded the buildings, threw grenades through the windows, and shot through the doors. The militia came in afterward to finish the job.
I stayed in an abandoned house for 2 months. Basically, what happened after my mom and my aunt left to the UN base not too far from our house, the following day, we heard that the UN mission for Rwanda had left the country, and all the people who had gathered at that technical school were killed. Actually, they took them to be killed at one of the dumping stations for Kigali. So that's the news we heard, that all of these people have been killed, and including my mom and my aunt.
At Ntarama Catholic Church, around 5,000 people who'd sought refuge there were massacred. At Nyamata, thousands were killed inside and around the church, and the memorial now holds the remains of more than 45,000 victims. At Murambi Technical School, around 50,000 Tutsi were tricked into gathering with promises of safety. Estimates are at least 50,000 were killed in a single coordinated assault on the 21st of April. Most of these sites are now memorials.
When I think of those 2 months, I think Like every single day I could have died, basically.
The killing ended in July 1994, but not because the international community intervened.
We now know from evidence that the government of the United States, the government of France, government of Belgium, the United Nations, all were aware of preparations for violence that could lead to genocide.
The RPF, the Tutsi-led force that crossed into Rwanda in 1990, captured Kigali by force and took control of the country by mid-July. By then, the majority of Rwanda's Tutsi population, at least 800,000 people, were dead. Most were killed in the first 6 weeks.
Public opinion can be a powerful force. And in the case of Rwanda, it wasn't there.
The UN set up the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda in Arusha, Tanzania, in November 1994. This was the court that investigated, charged, and tried individuals, and was the body that ruled that the mass killing constituted genocide. Over 2 decades, the ICTR indicted 93 people and completed trials that led to 61 convictions and 14 acquittals. Jean Kambanda, the interim prime minister installed on the 9th of April 1994, became the first head of government in history to be convicted of genocide. Jean-Paul Akayesu, the mayor of Taba Commune, became the first person convicted of genocide in an international court. In his case, the tribunal recognized that systemic rape and sexual violence could constitute acts of genocide when committed with genocidal intent, establishing a precedent that has shaped international law ever since. What's called the media case followed. Staff from RTLM Radio and Kungura magazine were convicted in the most significant international media incitement judgment since the Nuremberg trials.
One of the things that the government has done is to ban the use of ethnic terms. You can't identify now as a Hutu or Tutsi.
The government restricted political organizing and public discourse around ethnic identity. The new national narrative was a single phrase, Ndi umunya Rwanda, I am Rwandan. This was significant.
I think a significant amount of progress was made in a kind of 15, 20-year period following Rwanda.
Rwanda has made some major gains in health and education, outperforming some neighboring countries in several development metrics. But many human rights and democracy organizations still view Rwanda as a relatively authoritarian state.
"32 years later, we've just contracted. You know, we have less capacity to cover these events.
Human rights organizations, journalists, and foreign investigations have documented cases involving attacks, disappearances, and suspected assassinations of Rwandan dissidents abroad, including in South Africa and Belgium. The Rwandan government has repeatedly denied involvement in such cases.
When I look at what happens in the world today, when I look at the spread of authoritarianism, I worry a lot because I really see echoes of what I saw in Rwanda in 1992 and 1993.
The Rwandan genocide did not happen because the country was uniquely violent. It happened because Rwanda was uniquely prepared.
I don't understand how 32 years later after Rwanda, but Rwanda was after the Holocaust and after other instances of incredibly well-documented, politically motivated genocides, how we still don't see the signs and take action. It's a puzzle.
We started off with a question. How do you turn the radio, the one thing everyone in a country trusts, into the instrument of its own undoing? It was history, shaped and hardened over generations. It didn't start with the radio. It started 60 years earlier with a census that turned a neighbor into a racial category, then spent decades teaching people to fear that racial category. The machinery was assembled in plain sight, one step at a time, until the most ordinary aspects of Rwandan life, an ID card, a familiar voice, the word for work, had all been turned into the instruments of its undoing.
The consequences of the genocide, the trauma, those are going to be present for a long time.
One of the most concerning elements of this whole story is not how distant it feels. It's how familiar it is in today's world.